Hello and welcome to today's A-Team Group webinar covering the evolution of data management for the buy side. My name is Sarah Underwood. I'm an editor at A-Team Group and I'll moderate the webinar. Our expert speakers today are Carolyn Baker, Head of Data Management and Governance at Jupiter Asset Management, Linda Kaufman, Executive Vice President, the Reference Data Utility at SmartStream, Kirsten Hochstein, Head of Entity Data Services at Refinitiv, and Naomi Clark, Chief Data Officer at Hub. I'll ask them to introduce themselves in a few minutes, but first just a bit of info that can help you get the most out of the webinar. To the right of your video screen, you'll see two panels, one which says polls, one which says Q&As. We're going to run 3 polls during this webinar, so please take part and place your votes, and we'll share comments on that as we go along. In the Q&A panel, please feel free to write your questions to our speakers. We'll take those throughout the webinar so that we don't leave them till the end and run out of time. So if you have any questions for our experts, please do just put them there and I'll put as many as I can to the speakers. So thank you for that. And now back to our speakers. Carolyn, please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Carolyn Baker. I've been at Jupiter for 4 months now. I've been in the asset management industry for 20 years and certainly in data for about 24. So I'm looking forward to collaborating on the panel this afternoon.
Thank you. Linda.
Hello, everyone. My name is Linda Kaufman. As Sarah just mentioned, I'm responsible right now for overseeing the SmartStream Technologies reference data utility. I'm really happy to be here today with the rest of the panel, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Kristen.
Hi, I'm Kristen Hochstein. I'm head of entity data and Symbology within our pricing and reference services group at Refinitiv, which is now part of London Stock Exchange Group. And I'm looking forward to discussing needs of our buy-side clients as we continue to invest and support them.
Thank you very much indeed. Naomi.
Hi, I'm Naomi Clark. I'm Chief Data Officer at Hub, which is a joint venture between PIMCO, Man Group, State Street, IHS Markit, Microsoft and McKinsey to build an asset management data platform in the cloud. And yes, this is a topic dear to my heart now.
Thank you all very much indeed. And let's get on with the discussion. But first, let's run an audience poll question to gauge progress on enterprise data management in the buy side. The question is, how advanced is your organization's enterprise data management? Please select your answer while I come to Kristen to set the scene and with a rather broad brush, talk a little about where the buy side is in terms of evolution of enterprise data management.
Surely. So there's a big focus on reducing TCO. It's a huge factor in how buy-side customers are consuming and making it a seamless priority. But in terms of overall EDM progress, I would say starting to make progress, but still have a ways to go. There's increasing demand for more and better quality and faster data. So we do see increased automation. We do see it sometimes sophistication across the buy side, but our buy side clients are telling us that the front office is falling short of its potential because of a lack of access to data and tools they need. So I would say there's work to do.
Excellent. Naomi, what would you say there?
I think I'd back up a lot of what Christian's said. I think it is, where does the value come from in an asset manager? And I think the trend is actually picking up quite a lot over the last year or so, especially in the front office, where we're seeing increased demand for analytics, real-time data science. And there's starting to be quite a differential between those asset managers that have got legacy drag and those that haven't. But there's also this, how do we run the platform? How do we run all our infrastructure and reduce the costs? But I think it all centers around how quickly we can overcome this legacy drag and pull things around the data that we need to share and collaborate with across the organization.
Okay, thank you both. And let's see the poll results, if we may. I think and that's pretty reflective. What would you say, Kristen?
Exactly what Naomi and I said, right? We think there's some really good progress, but there's still a lot of work to do. So I think it's consistent.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And before the next question, even, let's run a second poll on what are the key drivers for data management change and see if we can come up with some consensus here. And on this one, please feel free to tick as many of the boxes as are relevant to your organization. And I will come to Linda, please, who will explain how she sees the drivers for business and regulatory change on the buy side and what data sourcing and data management issues this raises.
So I'm sure we could all come up with a very long list of challenges, but I'm going to pick one, I think, to single out, and it's the balancing act buy-side firms need to manage currently between business and regulatory drivers. So you hit on both of them in the questions. Buy-side firms have always been really laser focused on delivering client-centric, solutions. And of course, that makes sense, right, to drive their business. And now I think a lot of them find themselves in this world where they have to share budgets and resources, et cetera, with the regulatory initiatives. And so it's kind of a hard transition with the rate, especially that regulations are rolling out at the moment, to make sure that they, have the right requirements around their regulatory obligations. And it's really introducing new challenges influencing their data management solutions. So we see firms, starting to onboard data sets that they've never really had to pay attention to before. And that means that either it's new technology, but it's also a combination of technology and people. So do they have the resources internally that understand the regulatory piece of it, so that they can drive the right technology data? So it's not just a tech data challenge. I think it's a combination of tech data and a people and knowledge issue as well, challenge as they get further and further down the regulatory road.
Thank you. Carolyn, as a practitioner, where do you see the challenges and the drivers?
I think it's fair to say that there's been an absolute tsunami of change on the regulatory front since 2008, which has kept armies of people engaged on sort of the data management or the reporting side for years now. And you only have to mention MiFID II, and you can hear the sort of the sigh of bewilderment sort of going around the room. But I think on the regulatory side, I think that the biggest challenge that I've experienced really is the clarity, what actually comes out of the regulation, and the amount of time that everyone collectively spends trying to interpret that and what that means. With the interpretation is also that the other issues in terms of, well, what's the best practice, what's the intellectual property, who owns this, and how you might interpret it as one asset manager might be very different to how a number of your peers will then interpret it. And that was really evidenced with something like Solvency II, where if you were an early on boarder trying to sort of produce that information, as an asset manager, we were certainly dumping large amounts of data out to insurance clients, who were then massively bombarded by asset managers providing completely inconsistent data because there were no standards, because the regulation just wasn't explicit enough in what it was trying to do. And it was only the delivery of the tri-party template that sort of came to save the day in terms of kind of any standard. So I think that's one area. It's also a vendor's dream as well in terms of that, because there's obviously the licensing element of being able to buy the data and also kind of pass that on. I think aside from the regulation, one of the other business drivers is kind of around any client-driven requirements. Obviously, companies need to remain competitive, so that there's very much about requirements for providing sort of good quality data and sort of retaining that competitive edge against your peers. There's the requirements from sort of changes in order management systems. Certainly, risk management systems tend to be very heavy on some of sort of their data sort of requirements. So they can be sort of very explicit with what they want, and that can produce some real sort of challenges as to where you get that from, and obviously inherent costs in terms of delivering that. And one of the other areas I think is sort of in terms of sort of driving the change, unfortunately for a lot of people, are errors. Errors can be your best friend, because I think in terms of, if you've asked for a data set for a period of time, or you've asked for a control over sort of data, and you don't get it and then you have an error, many ways of mitigating the risk is to be able to eventually deliver that. So that's where I see the main challenges being.
Okay, let's see what our audience says. Please maybe see the poll results. Yep, that issue of cost that I think Kristen mentioned in her first answer, improved regulatory compliance, ability to enter new markets, particularly ESG, we'll come back to that later, and modernization and gaining competitive advantage. But there are obviously a lot of things perhaps to do before people get to that point. Would you like, who should comment on this one? Yes. Naomi, would you like to comment on that poll result?
Yeah, well, I think definitely the reduction of costs is something we're picking up. It's just the fragmentation across the technology landscape of the same data sets. And you just think in most places the manual effort that's required to do that, or all the data wrangling processes that have to be done in data science and analytics. This is your first base really, that you've got to get to the control around your efficiencies with data right from the outset before you can do any of the others. Okay, Linda, what do you see there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the cost, it's no surprise that big red line across the top of the screen. And again, it comes back to, you don't want to, as Carolyn mentioned, right? You don't want to forget about your business drivers and the fact that you still want to spend money, making sure you're focused on your customers' asks, whether in the OMS, et cetera. But at the same time, you have this heavy burden of regulation. So how do you make sure that you have the funding and keep your costs down where you can so that you can address all of those issues? So that's not a surprise either.
Okay, fine. Changing direction a little bit and coming to you, Kristen, how best can buy-side firms take a data-first strategic approach to these challenges? Because obviously cost is an issue. How can they get themselves into a data-first position?
Yeah, I mean, there has to be a level of customization depending on your firm. But the 3 points I would like to make, the first is around data governance. And it's so important ensuring that there is a clear, structured program in place. The second, I mean, there's a big movement and investment in moving to the cloud. So we have to make sure that we're breaking down silos and improving handling of data. So I think we all know the benefits of agile technology and maximizing scalability. And then the third point that I would make is around strengthening operational resilience. So it's the agility and ability to recover quickly during these difficult times. And it was Charles Darwin who said, it's not the strongest or most intelligent who will survive, but those who manage change the best. So I think it's, again, this cohesiveness and ensuring that there's a level of interoperability and ease of access to data.
Okay. Linda, how would you suggest people get into this data first kind of place?
So I think that buy-side firms are getting more comfortable with outsourcing. We're seeing it as one of our bigger growth sectors in the managed service space. So, it's traditionally a space that was, much more of a comfort zone for sell side. And circling back to what was just said about oversight, et cetera, and what I mentioned before, as they shift towards outsourcing or hosted approaches, it's about striking that balance between tech solutions and humans. And we've seen firms take advantage of a lot of good managed service and third-party solutions, but never bring any human expertise in-house. So it's that oversight on the that's missing, right, from if you don't have that expertise in-house. So on the regulatory side of the fence, for instance, we've seen buy-side coming to us with MiFID. We've already brought up MiFID, our favorite topic, MiFID reporting issues, because they either didn't have enough expertise in-house to understand the nuances of when they need to report, or they relied on a third party to figure it out and never put controls and the right oversight. So I think, Kristen just mentioned the oversight. Outsourcing can be a really, really good thing and allows buy-sides to get, back to their business and customer focus. But they don't have to reinvent the wheel, but they really need to make sure that oversight is there, whether it be operationally, technology, data quality programs, et cetera, and so forth. I think it's great that they can mutualize, right? And they're getting more comfortable in that hosting outsourcing space, because the mutualized and cost efficiencies are just dramatic. But at the end of the day, it's still their responsibility. So you have to just make sure that you have that oversight in-house and expertise to support it.
Thank you. Naomi, what would you say there as the practitioner doing all this work?
I think to pull all that together, I'll pick out this word strategic, because I think it means there has to be a cultural mindset shift within the organisation. So thinking about organising yourselves around the data that you have, understanding that data, understanding what the control framework needs to be for that particular data set, and how that ripples through your processes front to back is kind of the foundation. And once you've got that, that gives you the context to look at MiFID. Do you understand it? Do you not? Is it a problem you want to solve? You'd rather be sort of thinking about how you make alpha than worrying about MiFID reporting. Therefore, why not outsource it? The technology is secondary, really. You've got to understand the data, how you use it, how you want to control it, and then pick the operating model that best suits where you want to be as a company. And that's what I mean by strategic. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. In all of these efforts we talk about, you often see a tactical approach first, and that really does bring me back to MiFID II, and then the need to find some kind of a strategic way forward to keep things going and be sustainable. Excellent. Let's move on and let's talk about digital transformation. Carolyn, what approaches can firms take to move forward with digital transformation and cloud migration? And they can take the approaches, how can they actually then sort of implement and get this done effectively?
Well, I'm going to approach the answer to this purely from data management practitioner side, leaving the kind of the infrastructure IT side to my colleagues. But I think I can see the migration to the cloud playing out with just being able to get better, easier access to kind of information throughout the firm. And that's certainly something that we're seeing at Jupiter at the moment. To be able to join data sets together that otherwise would be in their siloed platforms is going to be sort of revolutionary for certainly for parts of our organisation. And I don't see this as, sort of across the industry as being big bang either. I think a lot of firms are sort of taking a sort of a use case by use case approach to getting into sort of cloud as opposed to going big bang, but also being pragmatic about what they actually want to use in the cloud, because otherwise, costs can ramp up quite considerably very quickly if you're sort of taking stuff from and then putting back into the cloud. So I think firms need to be sort of very careful about kind of what they're looking at and where they want to see it. So certainly from Jupiter's perspective, we're looking at one of our internal warehouses as an initial kind of use case to kind of put it in as a replacement into the cloud, and then sort of joining up with other more sort of traditional sort of data sets that we'd surface from our EDM, for example, and kind of putting reporting layers over the top to kind of surface data easier for the business. I think from a digital perspective, many firms have concentrated on the digital side with a view of their sort of client-facing aspect. So either be that via portals or be it via their sort of internet sites. And I think we lag behind industries like on the retail side, where for years they've used insights gained from the information you get from those types of portals. Certainly on the asset management side, I think we are significantly behind that. But that's one area I see opening up, understanding client behaviours, what they're looking at on your website, what fund ranges they're interested in, and being able to gauge information from that to sort of drive your internal strategies, what's selling well, what point are people buying or conversely selling. So that's why I see how we'll move forward with some of that digital transformation.
Okay, thank you. That was interesting. Kristen, on just a wider scale, what do you see out there on a sort of in the industry in terms of transformation?
Yeah, I mean, Carolyn, you said one of the, your comments about being revolutionary. And I think that you absolutely have to have an agreed and supported effort from top to bottom. And you want to ensure that there's this understanding of the importance of, digital transformation and cloud migration. So I think that we also see that don't aim for perfection and iterate. And Carolyn, you also said customize. And I think there's that looking at, stack ranking the applications and determining the priority, assessing current infrastructure, really looking at on-prem and applications for that mix of proprietary and partner technologies. So it's about outlining the deliverables and focusing on optimization and making sure that there's the right level of training and documentation and testing is what I would say.
Okay, fine. Let's back up again a bit this time. And Naomi, that same old, how can firms achieve straight through processing, which is something that everybody is still working on?
Well, it's the same old answer, isn't it? The fundamental principle is that you get the data right first time at the front of your value chain. The first time it comes in to your systems, to your processes, make the effort to get the data quality right there and get the control around creating and amending that data and retiring it. Because most of that data is used all along the value chain, right to the back, and then risk and client reporting sort of copy it at the end and realise the errors. And I think it's still the case that it almost costs 5 times for each step along a process chain if the data is wrong in order to correct it. And if you think it's a bit like those COVID exponential curves, isn't it? A piece of data goes wrong somewhere else, they use it, they compound the felony. And in the now that we have to get the data lineage in place so we can demonstrate to regulators that the data is sound, now's the time to start at the front and get your core data correct at the start. After that, I'm afraid it's your nitty-gritty work. It is a kind of a process re-engineering problem, really. You have to understand what data is used down your value chain, where you've got duplicate cottage industries rehashing the same data. I've got all my Aladdin files in, everybody's joining the same files, point-to-point connections. And if you gradually tackle the worst cases of pain, it is possible to have an impact even within a legacy environment, but you've got to be very rigorous and systematic about understanding that value chain and how the data is used. Once you've done that, that's the keystone then to moving leaps and bounds further on and utilising new tool sets. There's no point dumping the same old thing in the cloud. If you didn't understand it when it was on-prem, you won't understand it when it's on the cloud. You've still got to, even more so, you've got to govern it more. You've got to put the tags on it. It's got to be in your catalogue, your glossary, the business understanding. Otherwise, your data science people can just more easily compound the felony of making up incorrect numbers speedily. So it's discipline and rigour. Focused around what the data is, what it means, where it goes.
Excellent, thank you. Kristen, what would you add, and how do you see people struggling away with SDP?
Yeah, I love your answer, Naomi. I think that asking what manual spreadsheets and manual processes, you said it's across the firm to understand where that re-engineering needs to take place, and then don't accept we've always done it this way. This is a big focus. I'm on ZTSI's board, and it's a North American standards organization, but the same thing around increasing automation, decreasing manual processes. It's this consistent theme about how we ensure that we reduce risk and losses in the system. So I think it's important, going back to our conversation earlier on TCO and reducing costs, but we have to shake it up because there are people who are holding on to the old ways.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And next up, we'll talk about tools and techs that can perhaps help people. But first, let's run a poll question to find out what our audience favours in terms of techs and tools, solutions and services, and so on. So while you tick the boxes that are particularly appropriate to your organisation, let me come back to you, Kristen, to talk about the kinds of tools and solutions, and it may be cloud, that you see being particularly useful for the buy side at this stage?
Yeah, the first thing I'd say, because I know we cited ESG and there's all data, there's billions right now being spent across the buy side in an effort to outperform competition. So everybody wants that edge. So you really don't want a model that's siloed. I think that's important. This seamless integration of content, cloud-enabled platform capabilities, and really ensuring that there's flexible distribution options. And the other comment that I think we're all emphasizing too is that this customization. So it's not one size fits all. Some solutions are better for analytics versus data warehousing versus overall processing. So it needs to be the right approach for each workflow function.
Okay, Linda, what would you say here in terms of getting it right and then moving on and looking at ever more popular topics like ESG and so on?
Yeah, I mean, I can't agree with Kristen more on the flexibility piece of things, right? We know that firms are looking for more and more with respect to flexibility in how they source and onboard data in particular. And in the ESG space, it's such an evolving set of data standards are being adopted, and everyone's trying to kind of get their footing as they onboard lots and lots of different areas. I think everybody went out with ESG with this, like, why, just give me everything that's out there. And now they're trying to sort through, how does that fit into my EDM? How do I figure out what I really need, what I don't really need? And so they really want something that's not going to be a long-term onboarding project. So we hear a lot about time to market, time to market, time to market. And I think from a technology solution, things like APIs, run out of the cloud can act as almost like a frontline defense to ensure that they're consuming data fit for purpose, and they can be nimble and flip things around quickly, get data into their virtual, they're always in. Lately, everybody wants to talk about, we want to test data quickly, right? We want to visualize what the data is going to look like, and then get it pumping through our systems to see if it's a fit for purpose before we sign some big check and start getting in a heavy amount of data. And so I feel like technologies such as APIs really come into play in that space.
Okay, lovely. Let's see what our audience thinks and what their favorite things are. The cloud. Excellent. Managed services, I think we've talked about. You just spoke about API integration, open source tools, less so. And machine learning, less so. I think we'll be coming back to a question maybe on that a bit later on. Linda, does that ring true with you?
Yeah, and I think the cloud is pretty broad, right? Because you could do so much in the cloud. So the API could be running out of the cloud, your how you manage sets of data. So I think the cloud is where our heads are in the cloud.
Okay, Naomi, as a practitioner, does that look kind of the kind of thing you'd expect to see?
Yes, yeah, definitely. That's why we're building our platform in the cloud, and there's all sorts of other opportunities there if you can get the correct governance, just the whole aspects of data sharing. Some of the products that are coming out there, I wouldn't be the only person that'd be glad to see the back of file transfers. So I think it opens up a realm of possibilities, but with the opportunity, there's also the opportunity to go badly wrong if we don't get a bit of discipline around it as well. So it's kind of that two-edged problem.
Yeah, you hear a lot about the advantages of putting things in the cloud, but also the need sometimes for more control rather than less. Absolutely. Thank you. Carolyn, coming back to you, and let's dig a bit deeper. And how can firms innovate, and how are they innovate to gain competitive advantage? We've talked about the things you really need to do to, run business as usual, but how can you innovate?
I think to sort of touch back on your ESG point from the previous question, connecting with what Linda said as well. I think many firms are actually sort of looking to produce their own sort of scores or screens to kind of give themselves the competitive edge. But I think it sort of remains unproven as to whether that actually works. And that just comes back to the fact that there's no defined standard, which goes back to what Naomi said at the very beginning. So what you're receiving from vendors is just to believe truth from that vendor. So I think that will as we've seen with some of the other kind of regulations, that's going to kind of emerge, and it wouldn't surprise me if we saw someone coming up in sort of the next couple of years with some form of kind of standardization. So that was just kind of cover off the sort of the ESG point. I think in terms of other kind of elements of innovation impacting the buy side, I think we're seeing another slightly different shift to outsourcing. So we've had the sort of third-party administrators that have been up and running for some years now, and that's well and truly bedded in. But we're seeing another element to what they're providing now. They're providing software as a service. They're providing order management systems that they host on your behalf, that their staff look after the data management on your behalf. They'll look after this, complete front to back services. So that's something I saw at my last company, where we had sort of data management as a service sort of coming on board. So in terms of innovation, we're certainly going that direction at a time where firms are seeing a massive squeeze on margins, and merger and acquisition activity is kind of rife. And I think companies are looking at their sort of core elements, which are probably sort of the investment management distribution side, and not to be retaining large volumes of staff on sort of IT and operations. So I see data management sort of evolving in that regard in the future. Another area of innovation, particularly pertinent to Jupiter, is around sort of data science, the gain of data analytics and insights from data. You talk about the concept of big data. That wasn't something that was ever spoken about at the beginning of my career. No one understood what that meant. But now with the likes of some of the large data sets that are coming on board, being in the cloud, you can then merge those with some of your more kind of standard data sets, your positions, your price master, security master, and so on. Everything is fungible when you can put it into a cloud, and you can sort of cherry pick elements of that data using more advanced technologies to do so. So that's how I see it evolving.
That's great. Thank you. Naomi, what would you say here? How best can buy-side firms innovate? And obviously, first they have to develop the platform that we've been talking about, but going forward.
Well, I think I hope I'm in an enviable position, because I've been suffering pain for 30 odd years doing data management in asset managers and investment banks, insurers, with the legacy infrastructure. And with what I'm doing now, we're right at the sort of heart of trying to take an innovative data-driven approach. The asset managers taking control and doing their own data tech, as it were. So I think what's coming out is a lot of asset managers don't want the pain of running their non-differentiating data tech infrastructure. And how do they get out of the pain of not understanding the data, not having a centralized clean store of data, and then having the right kind of research environment that allows them to link things like clean sets of organizations to ESG data, to be able to take on alternative data that allows them to do more value driven rather than rely on the kind of necessarily just plain vendor data that Carolyn was alluding to earlier. So we're actually building a clean data storage that relies on a business data model that anyone can link in and interpret. We're going to be providing data connectivity to all the players in the market. So it's a sort of plug and play your own operating model. And we're aiming to have dynamic data governance. So all of that data quality, what's just put in a glossary and forgotten about, becomes dynamic, and rules are ingested into ingestion pipelines. And over the top of that, an analytics platform that's more than just reporting. It allows you to fundamentally drive processes of values of data, as well as the traditional sort of data science tool set. So it's allowed us to dream of the things that we wanted to do, and now we're going to give it a good go to get there. But it's greenfield and cloud, you see. Mm-hmm. And not many asset managers have got the luxury of doing all of that. So they really need to be innovative on their own infrastructure and platforms and target the things where they're going to get best value.
Okay, that's great. I have an audience question here, and Linda, could I put it to you first? And it asks, and it goes back to our technology conversation and the minority in our poll question. But we want to move on and use machine learning and other AI tools to improve data management. Where's a good place to start?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of use cases, and I can't remember which one of my co-panelists mentioned this, but in the AI and machine learning space, I think it's really important not to go in, across too wide. And so it may be around data quality, matching. We've seen people be able to apply machine learning and AI across entity matching, across some of their data quality, pieces of their data quality program, exception management systems, that kind of thing. And so if we're talking about within your EDM, my only advice is to really, really single out one use case to start with and have that drive you, because otherwise I find that I've seen some programs not succeed because they tried to reach for the stars, and it wasn't, it's not as easy. It sounds glorious, and I'm a fan of it. I'm not saying that it's not the next level of innovation, but I do feel like you need to zone in on one use case, and I would suggest it be in the exception management data quality area is a nice one you can usually kind of map out.
Okay. Karen, is that something you're talking about at the moment, or not quite there yet?
I don't think we're quite there yet.
Okay.
I think we've got some of the kind of other fundamentals to kind of look at first. So in terms of kind of probably just pick it up on in terms of the journey that we're on. Whilst we have sort of some data science, AI, I think is kind of maybe kind of the next stage up from that. So we need to kind of get, as I was saying earlier about sort of having everything in one place. I think once you've kind of done some of that, then we can look at focusing some of that kind of data science and some of those analytics and insights at various elements of the business. I think it's very investments focused at the minute, but I think it could be kind of repointed to other areas, definitely.
Sarah, can I just add one thing?
Sure.
So I think to Carolyn's point, if you don't have good data and you don't have those foundations done, what you're plugging into your AI and machine learning results in garbage. So it's really, I just don't jump ahead, get that foundation done, as Carolyn was.
Absolutely. And I think, we've done sort of various assessments on our sort of data maturity model. We know where we're at, and I think we need to kind of look at some of those foundation elements first. The completeness of those data sets, the masters, and the accessibility of that data before we can layer other bits on top of that. So I think we're kind of realistic and adopting more of a pragmatic approach to how we get there.
Right. Okay. Sounds sensible. And Naomi, coming back to you, we've talked a little bit about benefits, and you obviously have a greenfield site for which I'm sure many are jealous. But what benefits can buy-side firms gain from pushing forward technology and capability and also skills? Just if you're lucky enough to have all those things, what is it going to look like?
I see what I hope for is that there's less boundaries between business and tech. I think if you look at in the development world and all the emphasis on building products and teams that sort of coalesce around a business problem to solve or a product to build, if you can get, data's always kind of in the middle of business and tech. It's always been the bridging kind of departments, but if you can get people on the business side to be using more user-friendly aspects of tech, and you can get technical people to be more engaged with business lines and more collaboration across the front to back process, so everybody understands where they sit in the life cycle of data as it goes through, that would be my hope. That the cloud and new technologies would bring. Goes back to what my panelists were saying earlier about silos. Technology is only a toolkit. It's your culture and how you approach collaboration and how you work together around the data. So you might be in a legacy environment that works better than a cloud environment. And so get that culture right, get people understanding where teams can collaborate on building value for your firm, and then everything else will follow.
Okay, that's great. Linda, what would you say there in terms of, if you do get it all right, what are the benefits?
Yeah, I think that collaboration that Naomi was just speaking about can really, really lead to faster time to market and built-in cost efficiency. So if you have tech and business talking more, it's not just about the new technology capability, but it's about that collaboration. Then before you know it, your projects, and everybody's moving more towards an agile environment anyway. So I think a lot of that collaboration is getting baked into that agile environment. And I see that if that is successful, it's going to lead to a faster time to market and built-in cost efficiencies, which is what everybody is running towards anyway. And if your staff can buy into that and recognize the benefit of that, then I think it just gets ingrained in the culture, and you'll see the push for the new technology happen more naturally and organic throughout the firm.
Okay, that's great. I have a couple of audience questions here. Kristen, are you involved in ESG at all with your clients? Okay, I'm going to put this.
Yes.
Okay. We're developing an ESG strategy, but mixing ESG data with traditional data is difficult. How best can we go about this? It's a sort of a first step problem, I think, for a lot of firms.
Yeah, so I think it does come down to, as we're all saying, the ability to handle the data. There's going to be some level of syncing up the data, so ensuring that if you have different sources, you want there to be able to be linkage of using Symbology and other ways to append the content. I think Linda, you just said it really comes down to your ability to be able to bring those together, and it ends up being more about the data than about the way in which you do it. So I would say that it has to be enabling, but coming down to more about the data in that case.
Okay. Is this something you're doing a lot of, Linda, with your clients, helping them develop ESG strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest issue, I think it was Carolyn that mentioned it, forgive me if I don't remember exactly, but is that there is no really, really standard. I mean, everybody's grasping at straws right now, trying to sort through it. And of course, the question about linking it to the underlying data, if there's not based on, I think as the suppliers of the data evolve, it'll get easier to do that cross-referencing and that symbology. But this trickles back to if you have the underlying or the foundation right. So if you have symbology properly included in your entity database or in your reference data database, it's going to make onboarding this data as these sources iron out their data content. It's going to be making that data onboarding that data much easier if you have your ducks in a row when it comes to symbology within your own system. So as you wait for others to catch up from a provider perspective, maybe focus on your own symbology and getting that straightened out so that when you do the onboarding, it's easier.
Okay, it's interesting. People so want to go ahead, even though there are very, very few standards and no sort of regulatory standards yet. So yeah, it's good to see, but I think it's very difficult. Yeah. Okay.
And the industry is working on that too, Sarah. There are groups looking at ESG and launching that effort because, as I mentioned earlier, Zitzi, but there are a number of them out there where we're coming together as an industry and rolling up our sleeves and trying to solve for this because we don't have answers yet. But in working together, we can get there faster from a collaborative approach.
Okay, that's great. And I have one more here, and I think it's something we have certainly touched on, but Naomi, perhaps I could put this one to you first. It says we talk about driving value out of data, and yes, we've talked about that for a very long time, but what tools and techniques can really deliver tangible value, and how do you know what that is?
I think know the question that you're answering. So what do you mean by value? So have you what business problem are you aiming to solve? And then it's almost, well, like all data science type problems, you start with a hypothesis. And what is it that you're looking at? And you want to find out what the market says about a particular organisation. You might be wanting to link ESG. So on that side of thing, what's the problem? What data can I get in? What's the quality of data? And how does it link in with all my operational data? So start to map out individual problems and attack them as use cases to start with, where there's most value to be gained. Or it's similar on the operational side. What data can you actually use from your operational processes? Where do you have breaks? Where are things difficult? So you can apply the same mindset. So be very clear about what you mean about value, and then target, perhaps in an agile manner, with a team that brings together both tech, data and the business to have a go at solving particular problems that everyone can coalesce around.
Okay, thank you very much. Carolyn, can I ask you, and your answer maybe no, is value out of data something that your firm talks about and has some idea of not idea, but has its own interpretation of what that is?
Absolutely. And I agree with much of what Naomi just said actually there. And I think in terms of approach and what you're looking to achieve, I think what to have at the back of the mind is don't try and boil the ocean. I think if you take one element and you're working with the business to try and deliver them something, as opposed to sort of trying to tackle many different things and not actually delivering anything very well, delivering one thing well, it means more, and it means that you then gain the business trust in terms of what you're trying to do. You're trying to take them on a journey. So that, in my mind, to kind of delivers more value, because that could be a critical problem to them, and you've actually solved it, and you've solved it well. You've gained some trust from them. They'll come back, they'll work with you. So it's about sort of engaging those relationships and gaining the trust of the people that you're serving, really.
Okay, that's great. And can I stay with you, Carolyn, to talk about a case study of a firm, and it may well be your own, working on the buy side to advance data management and how you're evolving that?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about my own. These are my views and not those of Jupiter, obviously. But
Okay.
as I say, I've been in place since January, and I've come in as, you know, this is a completely new position for Jupiter. They haven't had anyone sort of head up data management before on a permanent basis. So Jupiter's undergone quite a lot of change recently. It's had acquisition, so there's been lots of things going on, and they've got some absolutely fantastic systems, some market leading systems in each of sort of the various areas of kind of risk order management, EDMs and so on. But I think what they've lacked is more of a conduit to sort of bring it all together, and that was certainly what came out of my conversation with the COO when I met with her at the first time. So the concept of kind of having more of a centralized data management function and someone that's joining the dots, so that there's some good data management practices, but they're siloed, they're federated, they're done by disparate teams, and never the twain shall meet. So there's some very good information and quality control data in the order management system, but then there's separate feeds going into the client reporting system, and and the performance system, and so on and so forth. So if you're going to get one area where you have an error, then it's going to be consistently inconsistent across the board, unfortunately. So that the whole idea is that they have an EDM platform is to kind of really fully utilize it for what it's made for, and to bring all that sort of data quality elements to one place, and then push the scrub data then downstream. And then so we're having to kind of build the team, because we don't have one team that sort of does that. So that's, I guess, sort of been the first hurdle of kind of identifying the pockets of these data people kind of around the business, and kind of bringing them together under one sort of central umbrella. And then, as we said earlier, once we have that foundation stone, we can then look at the concept of cloud-based solutions to create what I would say is sort of a data layer. So where we can surface those EDM data sets and things like ESG, which we've made a conscious decision not to put through EDM. I hasten to add, they are huge data sets, they're sitting outside, but we can bring that together in the cloud and kind of do some of that sort of very good analysis. So it's definitely a roadmap that we have. It's a journey. We'll be taking the business on that journey with us, but we're making some very early quick wins by sort of small deliverables to the business, so that they can see, they're not going to have like a 2-year project and nothing delivered in between. It's about sort of taking the business on the journey with you and providing benefits to them along that journey.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. That's I think a good lesson learned for a lot of people. Yeah. Finally, then, let me ask our speakers what advice they'd give to people working on the buy side and working to advance their data management. And Linda, perhaps you'd like to start.
Sure. One, don't be afraid to outsource. Just make sure that you have the proper oversight. 2, look to tech such as APIs to allow for a more nimble and fast integration. And then lastly, and I've repeated this throughout the day, our session, don't get lost in the data and tech and forget about the importance of data quality and proper operational processes.
Lovely. Carolyn, from your experience, what would you say?
I think my 3 pieces of advice would be collaboration. Speak to the business, understand what your requirements are. You're there to serve them. Innovation, you need to kind of keep abreast of where the industry is at, where it's going. Otherwise, you're going to be a dinosaur and be left behind. And agility. If you can't get things done quickly, you will be left behind.
Okay. Kristen.
So the people one is, I think, a theme that we're hearing on the first one, which is mine as well, around this evolution of the mindset. And then ensuring that teams are trained and giving them the tools and the right level of oversight and governance, which I noted earlier. My second piece of advice is don't customize for the sake of it. So look to standardize and simplify where you can, which, again, and make sure you have the right service providers to support. And then finally, whether it's to improve revenue or reduce cost or ensure compliance, you want to get it right, but it may be an iterative process. So test and reevaluate what approach you're taking would be my third piece.
Lovely. And coming to you, Naomi, for the last words of advice, please.
Yeah, I was supposed to summarise all that. Not people have stolen my thunder before. I suppose it's knowing the business front to back and where it generates value, where data needs to be controlled and governed to deliver that value, and then choose the data tech to support your view of your own business. But finally, I think a lot of it revolves around culture and making sure that people understand to be truly data driven. You have to think around data and not so much just around process these days. So it all stems from the people, as Kirsten said earlier.
Okay, a nice place to finish, with people, not tech. So thank you all very much to our speakers. Thank you for sharing your expertise and your experience, and thank you too to SmartStream and Refinitiv for sponsoring today's webinar. It's been a very good and interesting conversation. Before we close up, just a quick note that if you scroll down your screen to additional options, you'll see some A-Team resources that may be of interest. You can register for our September briefing on ESG data management, a strategic imperative, or you can sign up for our Data Management Summit in New York City, which we'll host in September. Or for next month, you can sign up for our RegTech Summit virtual. And coming back to the topic of ESG, which we've touched on quite a few times today, we have some exciting news to share, as here at A-Team Group, we're working hard to create a new content service called ESG Insight, dedicated to environmental, social and governance issues, including data sourcing, data management, standards, risk, reporting and regulation. And if you're interested in the topic, we'll be sure to email you and let you know when we launch. So be on the lookout for that. It will be coming very soon. That said, that's it for today. So thank you again to Carolyn, Naomi, Linda and Kristen. And thank you to all of you who've taken part in the webinar. Please complete our feedback form, as we're always keen to hear your views and improve our products. Meantime, thanks again and goodbye.